Chapter 49. 1:03 a.m., Bowie, Maryland, eastern suburbs of Washington, D.C. Luke parked 100 feet away. The house was a raised ranch, sitting on top of a 2-car garage. Just about every light in the house was on. One of the garage bays was open and lit up. The place looked like Christmas. There was nothing in the open garage bay, just some tools hanging along the wall. A garbage bin, a couple of rakes and shovels in the corner. Luke guessed that Brenna had moved his own car out of there so that Chuck could pull straight in when he arrived. These guys had no idea who they were dealing with. Luke glanced at the sky. It was an overcast night. With everything that was at stake, he wouldn't be surprised if at any second a drone strike obliterated the house. They would do it and claim it was lightning. Only they would prefer to wait for Susan Hopkins to get here before they did. The game was winner take all. Luke's phone rang. He glanced at it and answered. "Ed." "Luke. I'm glad you're still alive." "Me too. Thanks for the heads up. It saved me. Trudy told me to call. She told me your family is missing. Is that true?" "It is," Luke said. "Yes." "Are you going to stand down?" "I'm afraid it's too late for that. My best hope is to keep going forward." "I want to tell you something in confidence," Ed said. "I once kept a man alive for a week while I killed him. It was a private matter, not work-related. I would do it again if someone hurts your family. I will do it for you. That's a promise." Luke swallowed. The day might come when he took Ed up on that offer. "Thank you. What can I do for you now?" "I have a friend," Luke said. "He's an Iraqi doctor and he works at the chief medical examiner's office down on E Street. His name is Ashwell Nadori. I blew my cover for him in country once upon a time. Saved his ass. He owes me. When we hang up, I want you to call him, okay?" "Got it." "Tell him I'm calling in the favor. No uncertain terms. He doesn't have a choice. He told me he would walk across the desert on his knees for me. Something like that. Remind him of it. This is his one chance to repay me. Then go meet. Can you walk?" "No, not really, but I can gimp." "Then gimp over to his office. When you get there, call me back, but don't use the phone you're using now. Steal somebody's phone. I'm answering all my calls tonight. If I see a call from a number I don't recognize, I'll know it's from you. By then, I'll have picked up another phone. We'll do a call between the 2 stolen phones. I'll give Ashwell his instructions at the time. You might have to help him do what I need done. You might have to twist his arm a little." "All right, Luke. I'm pretty good at arm twisting." "I know you are." Luke hung up and got out of the car. From his trunk, he took a metal box and a green satchel. He walked through the dark neighborhood up to the front door of the house. He had a hunch the neighborhood wasn't really sleeping. Who could sleep on a night like this? He pictured dozens of people all around him, lying awake in bed, maybe talking quietly with loved ones, maybe crying, maybe praying. If there was a sniper positioned out there, they could take him out now. He braced for the shot, but nothing came. He climbed the stairs and rang the doorbell. It made a musical chime throughout the house. A few moments passed. Luke put his bags down. He turned and gazed out at the night. House upon house, street upon street, stretching several blocks over to the little Main Street area. For many people, this was probably the worst night of their lives. He was one of those people. The door opened behind him. He turned, and a man stood there. He was a tall man with silver hair and a craggy face. He looked like the kind of 65-year-old who had never smoked and still put 5 sessions a week in at the gym. He stood in a shooter's crouch. His hands held a large pistol. The business end was in Luke's face. "Can I help you?" the man said. Luke put his hands up. No sudden moves, no getting shot pointlessly. He spoke slowly and calmly. "Walter Brenna. My name is Luke Stone. I'm with the FBI Special Response Team. I'm one of the good guys. How do you know my name? Walter, everyone, and I mean everyone, knows your name. They all know who you are and what you're trying to do. I'm here to tell you it's not going to work. The bad guys heard your little chat with Chuck Berg, and they are converging on this spot as we speak if they aren't here already. You're not going to hold them off. Brenna smiled. And you will. I was a Delta Force operator on the ground in Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, among other places. No one even knows we were in the Congo. You understand? Brenna nodded. I do. But that doesn't mean I care, or that I even believe you. Luke gestured with his head. You see that box and that bag behind me? They're filled with weapons. I know how to use them. I stopped counting my confirmed kills at 100. If you want to live through this night, and if you want to see the Vice President live through this night, you should let me in. Brenna wanted to play 20 questions. And what if I don't? Luke shrugged. I'll wait out here. When Chuck shows up, I'll tell him the Vice President is coming with me. If he disagrees, I'll kill him. Then I'll take her with me anyway. She has to be kept alive at all costs. Chuck doesn't matter, and neither do you. Where do you think you'll take her? To see some friendlies. I have a doctor waiting, along with another former Delta operator. He's my partner. Not for nothing, but he's killed 6 men in the past 12 hours. 3 of them were government assassins. When was the last time you killed anyone, Walter? Brenna stared at him. Do you suppose you're going to make it through this without killing people? If so, you might want to think again. The gun wavered. I rang the doorbell, Walter. They're not going to do that. Brenna lowered the gun. Come in. Luke grabbed his bags and entered the house. He followed Brenna down a narrow hallway. They passed through an old galley kitchen. Luke took charge instantly, and Brenna accepted Luke's command. Are there any women here? Luke said. Children. Brenna shook his head. I'm divorced. My wife went to Mexico. My daughter lives in California. Good. Brenna led Luke into a bare room with no windows. There was a wooden table in the middle. Medical equipment was laid out. Scalpels, scissors, antiseptic, bandages, tourniquets. This room is double steel reinforced. It's in a dummy placement, several feet back from the walls of the house. From the outside, you don't see its location. Luke shook his head. No. They'll use infrared heat seekers. We had goggles like that in Afghanistan. You can see heat signatures right through the walls. They'll start a firestorm in here and we'll be trapped. Luke raised a hand. Listen, Walter, we're not going to win this by being cute. They're going to drop all pretense. There is no rule of law. There are no negotiations. There's too much at stake. When they hit, they're going to hit hard. We need to be prepared for that. They won't hesitate to torch this place, and then tell everyone a gas main blew. Personally, I'd rather die in a shootout on the street. Luke put his bags down on the table. The man was obviously a hobbyist, one of those so-called preppers, building cockamamie devices like this panic room and storing canned food to survive the coming apocalypse. It wasn't Luke's cup of tea, but it was better than someone who wasn't prepared at all. What else you got? Luke said. Give me something good. I have an M1 Garand rifle and maybe 20 magazines loaded with 30-06 armor-piercing incendiary rounds. Luke nodded. Better. What else? Brenna took a deep breath. Come on, Walter, out with it. We don't have much time. Okay, Brenna said. I have a GMC Suburban, completely redone in aftermarket armor. It's in the garage. It doesn't look like anything, but the doors, body, interior, suspension, the engine, all of it is wrapped in steel plates, ballistic nylon or Kevlar. The tires are modified run flats. You can ride on them for another 60 miles after they're blown out. The glass is 2-inch thick transparent polycarbonate and lead. The weight is immense, 2,000 pounds more than a stock Suburban. The engine is a jacked-up V8, and the front bumper and grille are reinforced steel. You could drive that thing through a brick wall. Luke smiled. Beautiful. And you didn't want to tell me. Brenna shook his head. I put $100,000 into that car. No better time to use it than now, Luke said. Show me. They moved through Brenna's house to the garage. Luke held Brenna back from entering. They stood near the kitchen door, mindful of the possible sniper angles coming through the open garage bay. Across the way from them was the black Suburban. Brenna was right. It looked like a typical late-model SUV. Maybe the windows were a little darker than normal. Maybe the truck glowed a little more than it should. Or maybe that was all Luke's imagination. "Gassed up?" Luke said. "Of course." "I need to borrow it." Brenna nodded. "I figured. Maybe I'll ride with you?" "That's a good idea. Do you have any old Secret Service buddies? Ones who are still able-bodied and who you know you can trust?" "I have a few I can think of. Yeah." "We need them," Luke said. "Hell, the country's still paying them a pension, right? They might as well put their bodies on the line one last time." Just then the rumble of a large motorcycle came to them from the street. It was coming fast. It appeared out of nowhere, made a crazy low turn into Brenna's short driveway, and rambled uphill into the garage bay. It skidded to a stop, the front tire crashing into the far wall. The rider managed to keep it upright. Luke pulled his gun, thinking it was the start of the attack. Brenna ran for the garage door. He leapt, grabbed a cord, and yanked the door down. He locked the door by hooking it into a heavy clasp on the ground. The man on the bike removed his dark helmet. A woman was on the back, holding him around the waist. Luke looked closer. In fact, she wasn't holding him at all. Her wrists were handcuffed around the man's waist. She was also tied to him with 2 large leather straps. Brenna produced a knife and immediately started cutting them apart. Once her wrists were freed, the woman's left arm fell to her side. She used her right hand to remove the helmet. Her short, blonde bob fell almost to her shoulders. Her face was dirty with soot. Her jaw was clenched. The left side of her face, nearly to the chin, was an angry, peeling red. Her blue eyes belied her exhaustion. Susan Hopkins looked around the garage. Her eyes caught Luke. "Stone, what are you doing here?" "Same thing you're doing," Luke said. "Trying to get my country back. Are you okay?" "I'm in pain, but I'm all right." The man put down the kickstand and climbed off the bike. He was very tall. His face was tired, but his body language was erect, and his eyes were alert. "Charles Berg?" Luke said. The man nodded. "Call me Chuck," he said. "The vice president has been a trooper. We've had a rough night, but she hung in there. She's as tough as they come." "She's the president," Luke said. And the truth of that hit him for the first time. Not the vice president. He looked at her. She was small. He couldn't get over that part. He always thought supermodels were supposed to be tall. She was also beautiful, almost ethereal in her beauty. The burn on her face somehow added to the effect. He felt like he could look at her for an hour. He didn't have an hour. He might not have 5 minutes. "Susan, you are the President of the United States. Let's everybody try to remember that. I think it'll help. Now we have to get out of here." Luke's phone started ringing. He looked down at it. He didn't recognize the number. Ed was calling. "Walter, this is a crazy question, but do you happen to have an extra cell phone you've never used?" Brenna nodded. "I have 5 or 6 prepaid phones. I keep them on hand in case I want to make fast calls that can't be monitored in real time. I use a prepaid phone once, then I destroy it." The guy was a jackpot. "You're a little paranoid, aren't you?" Luke said. Brenna shrugged. "Can't really blame me at this point, can you?" Luke answered his phone. "Ed, you with my friend there? Good. I'm going to call you right back." Chapter 50. 1:43 a.m. Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, Washington, D.C. Ashwal Naduri hung up the telephone. He sat thoughtfully at his desk for a moment. A large black man sat across from him in a wheelchair. The sight of the man, and the type of man he was, brought back bad memories for Ashwal. "Did he tell you what he wants?" the man said. Ashwal nodded. He wants a corpse, preferably intact. A woman, late 40s, blonde hair. Someone who appeared healthy before she died. Can you do that? Ashwal shrugged. This is a big place. We have many, many bodies. I am sure we can find one that fits that description. Once upon a time, in another life, Ashwal had been a doctor. Here in America, they did not accept his Iraqi education, so now he was only a medical assistant. He worked in this giant morgue, processing bodies, assisting with autopsies, whatever they assigned him. It could be unpleasant work, but it was also peaceful in its own way. The people were already dead. There was no struggle for life. There was no pain. And there was no terror of dying. The worst that could happen had already happened. There was no need to try and stop it, and there was no need to pretend it wasn't a foregone conclusion. Ashwal had a sick feeling in his stomach. Stealing a corpse was risking his job. It was a decent job. He was frugal, and the job more than paid his bills. He lived in a modest house with his 2 daughters. They lacked nothing. It would be a terrible shame to lose the things they had. But what choice did he have? Ashwal was Baha'i. It was a beautiful faith, one of peace, unity, and a longing to know God. Ashwal loved his religion. He loved everything about it. But many Muslims didn't. They thought Baha'i was apostasy. They thought it was heresy. Many thought it should be punishable by death. When he was a child, his family had left Iran to escape the persecution of the Baha'i in that country. They moved to Iraq, which at the time was mortal enemies with Iran. Iraq was run by a madman, one who mostly left the Baha'i alone. Ashwal grew to manhood, studied hard, and became a doctor, and enjoyed the fruits and privileges of that calling. But then the madman was toppled, and suddenly it was not safe to be Baha'i. One night, Islamic extremists came and took his wife. Perhaps some of them were his former patients or his neighbors. It didn't matter. He never saw her again. Even now, a decade later, he did not dare to imagine her face or her name. He simply thought, wife, and kept the rest blocked. He could not bear to think about her. He could not bear to think that when she was taken, there was no one he could turn to for help. The society was no longer functioning. The worst tendencies had been set loose. People laughed or looked away when he passed on the street. 2 weeks later, in the night, another group came, 12 men. These ones were different, unfamiliar to him. They wore black hoods. They took him and his daughters into the desert on the back of a pickup truck. They marched the 3 of them out onto the sand. They forced them to their knees at the lip of a trench. His girls were crying. Ashwal could not bring himself to cry. He could not bring himself to comfort them. He was too numb. In a sense, he almost welcomed this, the relief that it would bring. Suddenly gunshots rang out, automatic fire. At first, Ashwal thought he was dead, but he was wrong. One of the men was shooting all the others. He killed them and killed them. It took less than 10 seconds. The sound was deafening. When it was done, 3 of the men were still alive, crawling, trying to escape. The man calmly walked up to each and shot them in the back of the head with a pistol. Ashwal flinched each time. The man removed his hood. He was a man with a full beard of the Mujahideen. His skin was dark from the desert sun, but his hair was light, almost blonde, like a Westerner. He walked up to Ashwal and offered a hand. "Stand up," he said. His voice was firm. There was no compassion in it. It was the voice of a man accustomed to giving orders. "Come with me if you want to live." The man's name was Luke Stone. He was the same man who had just instructed Ashwell to steal a corpse. There was no choice. Ashwell didn't even ask why he wanted it. Luke Stone had saved his life and his daughter's lives. Their lives were far more important than any job. The last thing Luke Stone said into the phone decided him, if he hadn't decided already. "They've taken my family," he said. Ashwell looked at the black man in the wheelchair. "Shall we go in the back and see what we can find?" Chapter 51. 1:50 a.m., Bowie, Maryland, eastern suburbs of Washington, D.C. A motorcade of vehicles had sped through the night to arrive here. There were more than a dozen vehicles, mostly Jeeps and SUVs. All were black, with no markings of any kind. The last was a sort of paddy wagon, on hand in the unlikely event that any prisoners were taken. The vehicles parked quietly 2 blocks from the house. The neighborhood was a suburban cul-de-sac. On the streets, at least, there was only one way in or out. 2 SUVs parked face-to-face across that entrance. Meanwhile, a 20-man assault team closed in on the house. 8 men approached from the front, 5 each from either flank. 2 men, the team leaders, hung back, kneeling behind parked cars half a block away. They would use their spot as a viewing and command post. The men all wore Kevlar bodysuits and helmets. All the helmets had internal radios. The 8 men crossed quietly in front of the 2-car garage. The lead man carried a 30-pound steel battering ram, which should take the front door out in 1 or 2 swings. Each man after that had a flashbang stun grenade. Each man carried a shotgun. The plan was to blow the front door, then throw the flashbangs in. If the team was lucky, the blasts and the blinding light might disable the subjects, or might get them running from the house, where the rest of the assault team could easily take them down. The 3rd man in line, a young man named Rafer, wiped some sweat out of his eyes. Truth be told, he was nervous. He had a feeling in his bowels, a loose feeling like how it was before he went into a firefight. He could easily soil his pants. He smiled. Loose bowels were his good luck charm. 3 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he'd never gotten so much as a scratch in combat. Stop it. Pay attention. He brought his mind back to the present moment. The line of men leaned up against the garage door. The front stairs were a right turn 10 feet ahead. This had to happen fast. He pictured it in his mind. Bam! The door came down, and they threw their flashbangs. His would be second. Fall back, wait for the explosions, then rush in. Somewhere nearby, there was a sound. It was muffled, but it sounded like a car engine. And it sounded like it was right on the other side of this garage door. The guy in front of him looked back at Rafer. His eyes widened. They both turned and looked at the door. Luke sat in the driver's seat of the Suburban, inside Walter Brenna's closed garage. Brenna sat next to him. In the back sat Susan Hopkins and Charles Berg. Brenna had his M1 lying across his knees. Chuck had a 9mm Beretta. Susan had nothing. Luke was like the dad up here in the front. They were like his little family. His hands gripped the steering wheel. It was almost silent inside the SUV. In the corner of the garage was a small video display. It showed what was happening outside the garage doors. Men were out there, outfitted like a SWAT team. Luke had no idea who they were or what they thought they represented. Did they know there had been a coup? Did they know the real president was in here? Maybe they thought they were about to take down some terrorists. He shook his head. It didn't matter. They were about to hit the house, and that meant they were bad guys. They're not going to expect this, he said quietly. So we have the initiative, but it's not going to last. Are you planning to kill those men? Susan said. Yes. He turned the key in the ignition, and the engine barked into life. There was no turning back now. He put the car in gear and took a deep breath. Ready? It's a really heavy car, Brenna said. You have to punch it. Luke stomped on the gas. The tires shrieked on the concrete floor of the garage, and the Suburban screamed forward, blasting through the door, knocking it down, splintering it into pieces. The SUV erupted into the night. They bucked over something, pieces of the door, speed bumps, men. Luke didn't know, and he didn't care. To his right and left, men in black were running. He turned left, never letting off the gas. Men crouched and fired, spraying the side of the car with bullets. Dun, 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 dun. Susan screamed. Susan, Luke said, get your head down all the way in Chuck's lap. We don't know how long those windows are going to last. I don't want you sitting upright when they fail. The SUV gained speed. Luke felt the acceleration. 2 blocks ahead, 2 dark SUVs were parked nose to nose in the middle of the street. Men took up positions behind them. Luke saw the muzzle flashes of their guns. They were already firing. Where are we going, Walter? Straight ahead. It's the only way out. I guess we're going to find out how bulletproof this glass is right away. Luke stomped on the gas again, pressing it all the way. He watched the parked trucks zoom toward them, closer, closer. A dozen men in black fired their weapons. Bullets strafed the windshield like wasps. 2 men leaned across the hoods of the SUVs, still firing. Here we go. Boom! The Suburban smashed between the 2 SUVs, metal rending metal. It burst through them, spinning them, knocking them away like toys. The 2 shooters were sucked under and crushed. The Suburban barely slowed. Luke floored the gas pedal again. The car burst forward, gathering speed. A burst of gunfire hit the back windshield. Susan yelped again, but not as loud this time. Then they were out of range, moving fast. Luke glanced in the rearview mirror. Men were running, jumping into SUVs. Okay, Luke said. That went pretty well. Where's the highway entrance? Up ahead, Walter said. 1 mile on the right. The car ripped through the quiet town. Luke barely slowed for the highway entrance, taking the sharp curve ahead. They merged into 4 nearly empty lanes of traffic, running west toward the city. The car was still gaining speed. The digital readout hit 80, then 90, then 100. The car burst forward, its ride smoothing out. Luke took the curves of the road effortlessly. He embraced the speed, the exhilaration. For a moment, he smiled. The Suburban had blown right through them. Behind them, the first pursuit vehicles appeared. Luke could see their headlights in the rear view. Could he outrun them in this car? He didn't think so. He pushed the car on. 120 now. 130. Inside the cabin it was quiet. No one cheered. No one war-whooped. They hadn't won anything yet, not even close. Everyone must have understood that. Ahead of them, cars were signaling and pulling off the road. Luke glanced at the rear view again. Flashing red and blue lights now, coming fast. We're about to have a lot of company, he said. Behind them, the pursuit vehicles were closing in. They passed an entrance ramp. 3 more black SUVs raced onto the highway next to them. 200 yards ahead of them, 2 more had slowed almost to a stop. Their brake lights lit up in the dark. Stone? Chuck Berg said. They're going to box us in. I see that. Susan poked her head up. What would happen, she said, if we just gave up? They'd kill us, Brenna said. Do we know that for a fact? I mean, this is crazy. If they saw me in here, are they just going to shoot me? Brenna shrugged. Do you really want to find out? Every few miles they passed little turnarounds where state troopers would normally park to monitor traffic with radar, or simply turn around and go the other way. They were due to pass another one in a moment. An SUV pulled even on Luke's left. A gunman leaned from the rear passenger window. Get down, Luke shouted. The man fired at the back of the Suburban. Bullets strafed the side of it. Susan screamed. The rear window smashed but didn't break. Luke spun the wheel hard to the left. The armored car hit the black SUV and drove it into the concrete sidewall. The car crumpled, its tires shredded, and it flipped. The The Suburban kept going. Luke looked back at her. "Susan, I told you to stay down. I didn't mean sometimes. I meant all the time. They don't care about us. They're shooting at you. I'd prefer if you didn't show them where you are." They were surrounded by SUVs now. 3 in front, 1 to the side, 2 behind. The 3 in front slowed down and slowed down some more. There was no way around them. Their rear lights went light and dark, as they tapped their brakes. Luke looked at the speedometer. 60, 55, 50, 45, falling fast. They were trapped. There was no way out of here. "I'm about to do something really unpopular," Luke said. "I'd put it up for a vote, but I doubt anyone would vote with me." "What is it?" Brenna said. The next turnaround was coming. "This," Luke said, and spun the wheel hard again. The big Suburban veered through the turnaround, bounced over some rough road, and into the eastbound lanes of the highway, traveling west. Headlights loomed ahead, a sea of them. "Jesus!" Luke plunged straight at the headlights, jaw set. He stomped on the gas again. They plowed through the traffic, oncoming cars scattering like leaves. A tractor-trailer went by on his left. The entire car shuddered with the wind of it. "Luke!" Susan screamed. "Stop!" The Suburban accelerated into the traffic. Cars veered by. The headlights were nearly blinding. There was no time to look behind him. He gazed ahead, both hands gripping the wheel, his concentration supreme. It was a long straightaway, cars coming in droves. Luke plowed through like a boat cutting the waves. He began to get that confident feeling, that humming, buzzing feeling he associated with taking Dexies. He had to be careful. Overconfidence could kill. Cars zipped by like missiles. "Did anyone make that turn with us?" Luke said. Brenna looked back. "Nah. No one else is crazy enough." "Good." Luke veered all the way to the left and zoomed off the highway at the next entrance ramp. Chapter 52. 2:21 a.m. Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, Washington, D.C. Luke spotted Ed Newsom leaning up against the wall of the building, his M4 rifle cradled in his arms. The building was 4 stories tall with a glass front. It was located just outside the half-mile radiation evacuation zone around the White House. The streets were entirely deserted. It looked like most people had decided that a half-mile wasn't nearly far enough. Luke let the car roll to a stop on the sidewalk in front of the building. "What now?" Susan said. "Now you get out. You stay with Ed, Chuck, and Walter inside that building. No matter what happens or who comes, you stay with them. Stay as close as you can to Ed. Chuck and Walter are very good, but Ed is a killing machine. Okay?" "Okay." "Then let's do this fast." Luke popped out of the car. Smoke rose from the radiator. All of the doors were stove in with bullet holes. 3 of the 4 tires were shredded. All in all, the car had held up exceptionally well. Luke needed to get one of these. "Took some heat, huh?" Ed said. Luke smiled. "You should have been there." Behind him, they were climbing out. "Ed, you remember the president, don't you?" "Of course." Ed pushed the door to the building open. He had very little leverage and had to use his body weight to do it. They entered the main foyer. Ashwall was there with a wheelchair. He was a dark man, balding, with glasses. Years had passed since Luke had seen him. Strapped upright in the wheelchair was a dead woman with a blonde bob haircut. She wore a white spring sweater and slacks. Her skin was gray and slack, but otherwise she might just be sleeping. "Ashwall," Luke said. The man stared at him. "Luke." Luke gestured at Susan with both hands. "Ashwall, this is Susan Hopkins, the President of the United States. She's injured. I need you to diagnose her injuries and treat her with whatever you have on hand here. We can't bring her to the hospital. People are trying to kill her." Ashwall stared at Susan. Something slowly dawned behind his eyes. "I'm not the doctor anymore. You are tonight." Ashwell nodded, his face severe. Okay. Susan was staring at the corpse. Is that supposed to be me? She said. Yes. What are you going to do with her? Luke shrugged. I'm going to kill her.